So, the Blues didn't win the Cup this year. Bummer. Who would have guessed? After a season that had some of the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, we finally approached the offseason. Thought for sure this was going to be the year. Nuts. So, how do we get to the year? After subverting expectations, somehow making the playoffs early, does it put the retooling timeline ahead of schedule, or does it throw it off? Or are they doomed for another 54 years of mediocrity? Blues fans, it's safe to say we've been on a ride. Couple big acquisitions, expectations, sucking out of the gate, a coach firing, moving on for past mistakes, a hometown hero, a ridiculous win streak out of nowhere, all culminating in a playoff appearance that seemed impossible halfway through the season and a round one matchup with the Winnipeg Jets. Sound familiar? Regardless, it's very interesting seeing where the Blues are now versus where we, and presumably Doug, expected us to be at this point. The way he talked to the media since the 2022 season, it's clear that he was dedicated to the retool for at least the next few years. Judging by the way the team was playing too, you got the sense this wasn't going to be a quick fix. It's funny how quickly that narrative took a complete 180 with the Broberg and Holloway offer sheets. A retool, or a rebuild for that matter, is usually centered around the buildup of young talented draft picks. And not only are those two guys young talent, but they're both top 15 picks in the draft. Broberg was top 10. You've essentially sped up your rebuild by 2 years without even needing to waste time developing them. I did a whole analysis video on those deals very shortly after they happened if you're interested, but as optimistic as I was about these moves, I don't think I ever could have predicted how much they blew mine and everybody else's expectations out of the water. Holloway has proven to be an offensive threat after originally being marketed as a defensively minded center, while Broberg has been the steady presence on the blue line that this team has needed for a while. All the while, both have been putting up very steady offensive numbers. Broberg even set a franchise record. The precursor to this season was, shall we say, interesting. Last offseason, you had the Kevin Hayes cap dump, the Texier trade, acquisitions of the Joseph brothers, the Buchnevich extension, and the extremely underrated Ryan Suter signing, and the even more underrated Radek Faksa trade. Kapanen got claimed on waivers, and we learned that Krug was likely to miss the entire season, and by the looks of it, his career might unfortunately be over. Early season, we saw Nick Leddy go down with what we were originally told was a week-to-week injury that turned into him missing nearly 50 games. In a twisted sort of sense, this ended up being a blessing in disguise that allowed Tyler Tucker to get his first bit of consistent NHL action. If you ask me, he's turned into a fairly decent defender with a sneaky good shot and a lot of that good old Bobby Bortz toughness in him. We also saw the faith Doug had in Drew Bannister to lead this team through the and he's gone. By my count, Drew got canned only 22 games after his extension took place. Gotta be some kind of record, right? In those 22 games, they were sitting on a 9-12-1 record, which is 3 points in the standings away from dead last in the NHL. So close. In those games, the Blues either won in some late game, borderline insane, sometimes record-breaking, unsustainable shenanigans, or were thoroughly outplayed from the second the puck was dropped. But when a coach of Monty's caliber becomes available, you have to make a move, and Doug did just that. They signed Neighbors and Torpo to some team-friendly deals, and while things slightly improved under their new coach, it definitely wasn't immediately obvious. With defensive injuries and a lack of NHL quality defensive play in general, stretching this team thin in mid-December, in combination with being so desperate that they were calling up young D-men in their first pro seasons, as well as giving playing time to a 29-year-old career AHL journeyman, sorry Corey, Doug knew he had to make a move, so he took a very low-risk chance on an aging Cam Fowler, who without hyperbole might be the best trade acquisition any team in the NHL has made this year. After going goalless in his first 17 games this year in Anaheim, he exploded for 9 goals and 36 points in 51 games as a Blue, which, when stretched over 82 games, amounts to 15 goals and 58 points, which would be his career best, even beating out his 2016-17 season, where he was an NHL All-Star and received Norris votes. Not to mention, he got to play his 1,000th career NHL game in the Winter Classic, where he scored twice, and I was there for it. Here's that video. Still, despite this, there was a lot of struggle. Blues couldn't find ways to win tight hockey games, players were getting frustrated, fans were getting frustrated, playoffs seemed eons away. We all started to think that maybe this retool was further away from being done than we thought at the beginning of the year, but on the bright side, you had players like Dvorsky and Snuggerud making noise in the AHL and NCAA respectively, and you even had Swedish dynamo Otto Stenberg joining the Thunderbirds after being shafted for ice time in Sweden. It was pretty clear that despite the fact this team wasn't expected to make much of noise this year, something had to be shaken up. With Leddy returning, you had small things like the Perunovich trade, the P.O. Joseph trade right before the Winter Classic, poor guy, and the extension of Tyler Tucker, which I actually really liked. But the Blues took it a step further with a more unconventional approach by putting Brandon Saad on waivers, who elected to leave money on the table and terminate his contract rather than go play in Springfield. He's right, I wish him all the best, I just can't wait for him to score in every game he plays against us, like he always did before we signed him. Four Nations break, Binnington steals the show and proves that anyone with a negative opinion about him doesn't know a thing about hockey, and for some reason the Blues decide afterwards that they're the best team in the NHL. Players like like Bolduc and Holloway are finding next-level offensive production, Jake Neighbors continues to improve his defensive game while putting up solid scoring numbers. You had Dvorsky come up for a cup of tea, and he didn't look too out of place. And after the awesome season he's had in the AHL, that shouldn't have surprised anyone. On the same note, you had Jimmy Piss Missile and his Golden Gophers bowing out early in the NCAA playoffs, which ended up being a blessing in disguise as he got some NHL playing time before the playoffs began. All in the midst of a 12-game win streak, league's best record to end the year, and congratulations Blues, your reward for making the playoffs is a date with the #1 team in the NHL. Yeah. Blues never had a chance. I mean, okay, they hung in there really good. They put up a hell of a fight, and by logical necessity, every team has a chance against everyone in this league. But come on, the Blues didn't have a chance. Blues hung in the series for the most part really well and overall did better than I expected. It's frustrating, of course, because they could have won games 1 and 2 if they hung on just a little longer, but when you're playing a team as quick as Winnipeg, you're gonna run out of gas, and really, that's all that happened. Blues were simply taking advantage of a rattled and struggling Connor Hellebuck all series. If he had put up just an average playoff goalie performance, this series would have been over in 5. I don't believe the series was as close as double overtime game 7 suggested. I thought the Blues had more opportunities to win than I expected them to, but the same flaws that killed them all season proceeded to kill them in the end. In general, this was a very successful season. I know this loss hurts, but in my opinion, this probably isn't even top 5 most painful Blues moments of my lifetime. Regardless, a very entertaining series, and I'm sure Blues fans were excited to be back in the playoffs, especially ahead of schedule. I know I was. I have yet to attend a playoff game in person, period, and I know it'll happen soon, but I was at Ballpark Village for the Game 2 watch party, and while the Blues lost, the atmosphere was absolutely electric. The issues for the majority of the season were, in my opinion, different than in years past. Usually the Blues would either have non-existent defense, a coach who refused to give the young talent ice time, or be unluckily plagued with injury. This year, our blue line had some of the best offensive numbers we've ever seen, a coach who not only plays the young guys, but allows them to thrive on lines other than the fourth. And while the team was missing Krug and Leddy for most, if not all of the season, this didn't really affect how the defensive structure looked. The only significant injuries that truly affected the team's scoring and structure was Dylan Holloway, who was out of the lineup and was a big reason the Blues offense was stifled versus Winnipeg, and Colton Parayko later in the season, and even then the Blues went on that ridiculous win streak without him in the lineup for most of it. This year's boogeyman turned out to be a few things. 1, the lack of general identity and defensive structure. 2, lackluster special teams, and 3, abysmal 6-on-5 play. 2 of those things can be quantified with numbers, but one of them is more of a subjective observation, so let's get that one out of the way. If you were to quantify the mid-2010s St. Louis Blues, you would say it was a heavily defensive team with a physical presence scattered throughout the lineup. If you were to describe the 2022 Blues, you would say they were a veteran-driven team with insane scoring depth playing a speed-based game. And of course, the 2019 Blues were grinders through and through. They wore you down until you were exhausted and then picked at you offensively until they had you down and out. If you were to describe the 2025 St. Louis Blues, what was their identity? Not enough middle six scoring to say they're offensively driven. Other than the WTF line, there just isn't enough physical play throughout the lineup to classify them as a grinding team. Unless you count Parayko, I don't think there's that quintessential #1 defenseman that teams with defensive structure need. To me, that's a major problem. Every contending team in the NHL has a bona fide #1. I think Parayko is good, very good in fact, but he doesn't have the firepower, awareness, or tenacity that other defensemen that are so coveted in this league have. Again, don't get me wrong, I think Parayko is a very good defenseman. He is without a doubt the best on this team, but there is a difference between your best defenseman and a #1 defenseman. Here's how I justify it. When a team like Colorado puts out Makar, or a team like Tampa puts out Hedman against other teams' top line, you know that you're giving your team a chance to tilt the ice the other way through their elite IQ, skating, and shot, while also remaining responsible in their own end and shutting down the opposition through their awareness and physical play. On the flip side, when the Blues put out Parayko to match up with other teams' top lines, they do so only because it is the only logical choice. They have to. Are you really going to put Suter Leddy out there against Hyman, McDavid, Draisaitl? That's my point. What are the results? A defenseman who normally would make an excellent #2 is forced into the toughest defensive situation, getting shelled as a result because he hasn't gotten proper support since Petro left, leading to some deserved, but more often undeserved, criticism in the last couple of years. We saw this to a lesser degree very recently with Cam Fowler. The reason he's thrived in the Blue system after being shelled in Anaheim is the same reason. He is no longer forced into the top pair role. He's no longer the guy who needs to carry defensive play, and as a result, his offensive numbers have thrived. If the Blues want to have success, a defensive overhaul is necessary. We'll get to all that later on, but the moment you find a team identity and overhaul the defense, that should fix most, but certainly not all, of your issues. Do I know what the Blues identity should be? I have ideas, but ultimately that's up to Doug, Alex, and the rest of the front office to figure out. If you ask me, based on the guys already locked up and established as your core, the prospects that you have deep in the system, and the near NHL ready guys that you have that have already played NHL games, I think you have to go for an offensive first, speed-based future lineup, modeled after something similar to the construction of the 2022 Avalanche. Or if you need a more current example, something like how today's Dallas Stars are constructed. My amateur opinion, based on the prospects in the system, I think this is the most likely comparable incredible, but keep in mind that doesn't take into consideration any major moves that may shift that identity, which may involve dealing those offensive threats. For now, it's just too much of a crapshoot to even guess. Moving on. Number 2, special teams. In recent years, Blues fans have gotten used to two things: Jordan Binnington's slander and a terrible power play. This year it seemed to rebound. The Blues power play during the regular season sat at 22%, which is exactly middle of the pack. 16th out of 32. Not wonderful, but undoubtedly an improvement from what we've seen over the last 2 years. However, if we look at the penalty kill, yikes, 74.3%. That is 27th in the entire NHL. This has been a recurring trend over the last few years where they've fluctuated. So looking at the pattern, one can expect a rebound from them in that department next year, but it's not going to happen naturally. You need to shake up the defensive side of the roster for there to be results. It's hard to have success when your penalty kill plays so bad the opponent scores on a quarter of the penalties you take. This team takes too many penalties to be that bad at killing them off. However, it is worth mentioning the PK in the playoffs was spectacular, so maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about, but there's no denying those abysmal regular season numbers. I have some ideas on how to shake up the defensive side of the roster that we'll get to in a moment, but first we have to discuss one of the biggest reasons the Blues struggled this year: abysmal 6-on-5 play. Now, fun fact, I actually finished drafting this segment before we gave up 2 goals in the final 2 minutes of Game 7, so not only does this ring even more true, but it might be a bigger issue than I originally thought. Now, to be clear, the Blues played extremely well when they had their own goalie pulled. In fact, they allowed the 5th fewest empty net goals in the entire NHL, as well as have the 13th most goals scored. Taking into consideration the amount of opportunities and expressing the data as a percentage, they were the 7th most effective team with their goalie pulled. Now, of course, those numbers paint an ugly picture, since the only reason you'd pull your goalie is if you're trailing, and we all know the Blues did plenty of that this year, but I digress. No, believe it or not, the issue lies in their play against an empty net, and by extension, their inability to hold a lead for a majority of this season. I like to think I'm relatively well versed in advanced analytics, despite what many legends of the game have to say about that, but no advanced stat in the world has shocked me quite like this very simple one. Take a look at this. The best team in the NHL at playing against an empty net this season was the Tampa Bay Lightning, with a very impressive 28 goals for and only 2 against. Right behind is Winnipeg with 21 for, also 2 against. Down and down and down the list we go, the numbers start getting ugly. You got teams like Calgary, Columbus, New York, and Toronto? I guess that makes a twisted sort of sense, all allowing double-digit goals against. But where do the Blues lie? That's right, the Blues are the only team in the entire NHL this season to have a negative goal differential when the opponent's net is completely empty. Absolutely unacceptable. The last 3 teams to do that were last year's Islanders, Canadiens, and of course the ever miserable Sharks. Before that, you have to go back to the 2019-20 Ducks and that same season's Canadiens. The last team to do this and still make the playoffs was the 2017-18 New Jersey Devils, who were bounced in round 1. Sound familiar? So how do you solve these issues? How do you continue on the right track? Well, in general, I think Doug management-wise has knocked it out of the park this year, and I trust him to make the right move. So everything I'm about to say is strictly what I would personally do. I am not, nor will I ever be, an NHL GM, so take the biggest chunk of salt you can and take it with what I'm about to say. I know how the internet feels about opinions, so try not to get mad, and of course let me know in the comments if you do something completely different. Let's start with the forward core. I like what the Blues have done there. In general, I feel it can stay the same. With Dvorsky, Dean, Kaskimaki, as well as dozens of other intriguing forwards in the system, I think other than minor tweaks, we can rely on the young talent we have coming up to take us into the future. As much as I love Oskar Sundqvist, I think it's time to move on from him. He had a great playoffs, I thought, but there's no consistent spot for him in the lineup with everyone healthy. On the same token, despite similar postseason success, I think the Alex Texier experiment needs to be done. It was worth a gamble at the time, but it's clear whatever Doug thought he could bring to the lineup just hasn't manifested. Whatever you can get for him at this point, I think you take. Shouldn't have to give up any draft capital to make it happen. The only expiring forward contract you have is Radek Faksa, and I think it's a no-brainer move to find a 1 or 2 year extension for him. Another point worth mentioning is concerning Brayden Schenn. Now look, I love the guy. He's a great captain, and I would love to see him retire as a Blue. He's an incredible heart and soul guy who's done everything that's been asked of him since the moment he came to this city in 2017. He was also a big part of the 2019 championship team, and yes, that will always count for something in my book. But you also have to consider this. He is a very physical player. Players who are physical tend to decline faster than most. Brayden Schenn is 33 years old and carries a cap hit of $6.5 million until 2028. That is 3 whole years from now. With guys like Holloway, Broberg, Neighbors, Bolduc, and even Snuggerud needing long-term big boy deals, cap space is going to become very scarce very quickly, even with the potential cap increases. He could very well continue to be a great player, an ageless wonder if you will, but on the more realistic side, his contract as of July 1st will downgrade from a full no-trade clause to a 15-team no-trade clause, so there is some flexibility. As such, Doug is able to move him if they are desperate for space. I would only do this if they are, like I said, desperate. However, if you're going to make a move, you have to do it now, because depending on the speed of his decline, you might have to give up capital to move that contract. This summer might be the best time to make a move when you can get actual assets for him. You wait a year and he for some reason has a brutal season, then all of a sudden you're stuck with his anchor contract, and if you try to move him, it's going to end up costing you. That is something you want to avoid at all costs. The of course ideal scenario is if you decide to move him now, you would at the same time need to bring in a different, younger scoring forward. You either leverage the value Shen has in the deal or make a separate one. Other than in this highly specific scenario, I don't think you need to get any big fish scoring forward unless the price is right and the player is young. Brady Tkachuk, please come home. Now let's take a look at the back end. Defensively, like I've said, this team needs some work. It's been indicated in reports that Torrey Krug's career is most likely over, so operating under that assumption, we're not going to include a $6.5 million cap hit in any of the figures going forward. First priority is moving Justin Falk. He's only getting older and his decline has been rapid to say the least. The only reason he has a spot in this lineup is because he's right-handed with a borderline unmovable contract. The only good thing about that contract is the no-trade clause is downgraded to a 15-team as of July 1st, so it can be moved, but that will almost definitely require assets and draft capital to move. If you have to do that, then, well, you have to. However, there is another way. If Justin Falk were to be bought out after July 1st, but before the 25-26 season begins, this is what the cap penalties would look like. Not only are you saving on the cap, but you're also saving a spot on right D for either a big fish number 1 to fill or a younger guy to get his NHL playing time. Personally, this is the move I would make. You also have Cam Fowler and Nick Leddy, both sitting at $4 million each next year, but those are the final years of their deals, so they're movable if necessary. Leddy has a 16-team no-trade clause, Fowler has a 4-team. As much of a liability as Leddy has been recently, unless you're getting assets, there's just no need to trade him. Don't get me wrong, I have no interest in re-signing him. However, I can swallow a year at $4 million since it won't make a huge difference next year anyway. I'm in a similar boat with Fowler. This season is obviously the best we'll ever see out of him. Unless he's a liability next year, there's no rush to trade him either. The only reason you have to move him is if you've acquired other younger D-men who need playing time. But if you're planning on overhauling the defense, then pushing players like Tucker out of the lineup is only doing you a disservice. So you need to follow a 1D in, 1D out type of deal. Your only expiring defensive contract is Ryan Suter. If he'll sign for a league minimum, sure. Anything more, and I just don't think his services are desperately needed. As of recording, the most intriguing right defenseman free agent coming up would be Aaron Ekblad, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't get re-signed by Florida. He is also on the wrong side of 29, so he'd be looking for a long-term deal that just may lock the Blues into a different cap bind. You also have 26-year-old Dante Fabro that could be an interesting piece to fill the right side, and despite being on a very shaky Blue Jackets team, has put up surprisingly good numbers. I cannot believe the Preds put this guy on waivers. Other than that, your only other option is to acquire your new D-core via trade. I think you have Theo Lindstein coming up as your second or third pair guy in a couple years, so I don't think you have to lock yourself into anything crazy. I'm not even going to speculate on potential trades. I'd be hesitant to trade the next few years of firsts, but they aren't untouchable by any stretch. Regardless, I think every pick afterwards is fair game. I think the criteria would be a top pair left D to fit with Parayko, a second pair right D to fit with Broberg, and a third pair right D to shuffle with Fowler and Tucker. If Tucker is your 7th D-man going into the season, I'd say you're in damn good shape. If you're looking for a number 1 D-man, you'll definitely find more left defensemen fitting that mold, not to mention the fact that they'd be cheaper to acquire versus a right D. I think you can dangle pieces like Tucker, Jiricek, Stenberg, Dvorsky, even Neighbors if that's what it takes if you want to make a trade happen. Goaltending, easy peasy. Stick with what you got. Just for the love of God, sign Hofer. He has decent starter potential, and I just really want to see him wearing a Blues jersey when he scores his first NHL goal. Benner's contract expires in 3 years, and unless he deeply regresses and Hof has some insane development, it's best to just ride that contract out and examine your options for starting goalies in 3 years. Binnington had another great season this year. No chance the Blues make the playoffs without him. I love the guy, and until proven otherwise, I'm comfortable and confident in him being this team's starting goaltender. Here's what I think the ideal lineup would look like for next year, what contract extensions I would sign in their approximate numbers, and according to my very rough calculations and estimations, this would be the cap space the Blues would have to work with to overhaul the D-core. Plenty of room to work with, of course, but at the same time, the Blues shouldn't spend just to spend. If Broberg and Holloway will say yes to those contract deals, I would sign them right the fuck talk now. Realistically, the Blues should be competing for a spot in the Central next year rather than just a wild card, but keep in mind they weren't expected to compete for a playoff spot until next year anyway. Personally, I think since we're ahead of schedule, we can start slowly putting expectations on this team again because they're starting to prove they can take it. Now, let me be clear, despite what you've heard on the radio, the retool is not over yet. But we have a direction now, a clear picture of what we need. Regardless, there's no denying that this season was a huge step forward for the franchise. Just don't do it again next year, please. Hopefully, everything that I've said made sense and isn't just some incoherent rambling. Other than that, that's about all I have for you. Let me ask you this. Is this team ready to compete? Am I an idiot who has no idea what he's talking about? Let me know in the comments what you think the Blues should do, and I will see you all in the next video. Let's go Blues.